Hi, everyone. Welcome to Carousel Chats Kiddieland. Thank you for joining us today. This is a virtual presentation series sponsored by the Museum Association of New York. And we are joined today by the North Tonawanda Public Library, who is having an in-person viewing party. Today we have George Francis, a third generation of Quassy Amusement Park, a third generation owner of Quassy Amusement Park, and John Dombrowski, who maintains the Kiddieland rides at the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum. They will be giving presentations on their respective parks. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A box or the chat, and we will try our best to answer during the Q&A section. George, I will now turn it over to you. George, you're muted. Can you hit the unmute button, please?
There we go. I apologize. I guess I'll start. And so that's my presentation for today. Anyway, as I was trying to say, I'm not a nuts and bolts guy. I'm not a mechanic. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Quassy Amusement Park and our history and the part it played in the life and times of Alan Herschell rides. Quassy Amusement Park was established in 1908 by the electric company and the trolley companies. Like most iron amusement parks throughout the country, the trolleys were sitting idle most of the time on the weekends, and to enhance business, the electric companies and the trolley companies got together and decided to put these parks at periodic stops throughout the country. Quassy Amusement Park was as I said, was established in 1908, and we were considered the garden spot of Connecticut. And we sit on one of the most pristine lakes in Connecticut, which is still today one of the most pristine lakes in Connecticut. And our claim to fame, as in the title, was the garden spot. When I was young, there were hundreds of rose bushes all over this park, and there were arbors with roses all over them. And so, and our primary function at that time, and I still remember when I was a child, there were 2 gazebos in the park. And my dad used to tell me that one of his first jobs was to hold the canoe steady as ladies would board the canoe as they would row around the lake. So picnicking, the lake, and a beautiful setting. And obviously with the gazebo, they would have entertainment as well. And also one of our main buildings, which is still standing today, was a big dance hall. And they used to have the big bands here, and you can take the trolley for a nickel out to the park on the weekends, and ballroom dancing. So of course, as you see in the photo, all the old photos, the boats would come around the property and more while the bands were playing. And so that was kind of the beginning of Quassy Amusement Park. And again, in that time frame, there were over 1,100 parks put out throughout the country. Now we're one of 11 still in existence. So unfortunately, things are, like everything else, every generation gets thinned out. So let's talk a little bit about how it got to our family. The test worked. All these parks thrived while trolleys were the main source of public transportation. But as time went on and cars and buses started to come into play, the trolleys were no longer needed for transportation. Now you had options. You had buses that could drive people to other locations. So the properties started to become more valuable than the business. Back in the 30s, my grandfather and two of his buddies were living the immigrant dream, the land of opportunity. So we had these three Greek immigrants who were concessionaires here. And they learned that the properties were going to go up for sale. And there was going to be a silent auction. Now, this is the folklore of Lake Quassapag, and I don't know how true it is, but this is the story that I'm told. And so these three Greek immigrants, one night, there was three lawyers that were running the property. I apologize to any lawyers that might be in the group. But anyway, this is the story goes. There was three lawyers that were running the property. And at the time, our local community, Waterbury, was a little bit corrupt. And they thought that they were in cahoots with all the players in town, the politicians, and they figured they were going to put this property up for sale. They were going to do a silent auction. No one would know about it, and they're going to get this property for a song and a dance. So it turns out one night, my grandfather and a bunch of his buddies were playing cards, and one of the brothers decided to join in, and the booze was flowing. And it turns out that throughout the course of the night, one of the brothers started to get pretty loaded and started to brag about how he was going to he and his brothers were going to get this property for a song and a dance and take it over and the whole bit. And so the three Greek immigrants got together and said, listen, we can put our money together. We can put in a bid too and take over this business and run it. So the day came, and apparently the box was open and there lied two envelopes or two bids. And these three Greek immigrants' bid was a little bit higher than the three corrupt people that were running the property. And so at that time, 1937, back in the day, was called Franziskakis, was the three Greek immigrant men took over the property. Now, the story goes that the carousel, which was a hand-carved E. Joy Morris carousel, was in a cabana on the opposite property, and they weren't going to give it to these three Greek immigrants because it wasn't on the property, even though they bought the business lock, stock, and barrel, and they had to pay a few extra $100 before because they were literally going to gas it and burn it to spite them. So in 1937, our family took it over and had started running the business, and obviously right at the beginning of the Depression as well. So there were some pretty tough times getting through it. But as you may or may not know, you look back in time and history, what's successful during all the fiscally tough times, and it's the boardwalks, it's amusement things, it's families need to be out, they need to be together. And so we muscled through it. And so my grandfather passed away at a young age, and my dad had to come into the business to take over and provide for the family. And so he did that around 1951-ish, when he got out of college and got done with the Navy. And that's when there was always a carousel here and a few other rides. But at the end of the day, that's when we started really putting out amusement rides, as well as the picnicking and the lake entertainment. So my dad was responsible in 1952, purchasing some of his new Alan Herschell rides. So Alan Herschell was introduced to Quassy Amusement Park in 1952. And the photo you see right there was basically the first layout. You had the Little Dipper, you had the boat ride, you had the jet fighters, and in the middle of the two was a buggy ride. That footprint and that layout was actually used on one of the Alan Herschell promotional flyers I've seen in the past. And it was taken from one of the roofs of our arcade building, or the skee ball alley that it was that day. So it was those four rides together that Alan Herschell used to market the sale of these three pieces. And it ran that there for, boy, quite a while. I'd say it's still there. Obviously, it's still running, except we took the pony carts out because they weren't, kids didn't like them that much as the other two. And in today's world, we needed to fence off each individual ride. So there just wasn't enough room for customers and fencing. Because back when I was a kid, literally the three rides were there and you could jump on from every angle. So it's pretty crazy. But we, every ride now has to be fenced off. And, anyway, so, that kind of, and then in 1959, we purchased the helicopter ride and an antique auto, or what I call the antique auto, the Kiddie Auto ride, which is the one you see with the fire engine and then a car. And then the other Alan Herschell ride we had a little conversation offline earlier. Our first roller coaster was purchased in 1960, which was one of the original Wild Mouses, but it was wood and it wasn't an Alan Herschell piece. But back in 1960-ish, no, I'm sorry, I think it was 1983, we ended up purchasing an Alan Herschell Wild Mouse to replace the wooden Wild Mouse that we had. So yeah, Quassy Amusement Park is riddled with Alan Herschell products and has served us well throughout the years, and they just keep on going, and kids after generation after generation still love them. We're going to celebrate 115 years come next year, I think it is. And it's been in our family, like I said, since 1937. So that's a pretty quick overview and history of Quassy Amusement Park and Alan Herschell and how it played a significant role in the growth of our company, our business, our family. And I don't see that changing. I see these pieces are historic. And so, yeah, to this day, that one photo you see of the Kiddie Auto, if you look closely on that little boat, there's a dent in the bottom. When I was 5 years old, 4th of July, I found a cherry bomb and I lit it and I panicked and I threw it in the boat tank and it blew up and dented the bottom of the boat. And to this day, I will not let our mechanics or our grounds guys fix that dent. Boy, did I catch a whipping for that one. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my little history lesson of the park. We've grown substantially. Eric Anderson was supposed to be on the call as well, and he bought into the park in 1999 and has been a major asset to the growth of the park and since that time, the last 20 years, and has made us a viable, strong business. And he handles a lot of the nuts and bolts part of the park and the growth of the park. So unfortunately, that's kind of where I think he was going to get into it. But at the end of the day, that is my history lesson. I hope, did I make my timeline or did I go over it?
You did wonderful, George. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great learning about the history of the amusement park. And John, it's now your turn.
John, you're muted too.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here to have this opportunity to share a little bit of our Alan Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum with you. We have 4 historic Alan Herschell Kiddieland rides in what we call our Kiddieland testing park. They've all been fully restored and are operated regularly during the summer season for the enjoyment of the kids and the adults. Just quickly, I'd like to say the Alan Herschell Company, or Alan Herschell himself, through several companies from the 1880s. Initially, when they got into making carousels and other rides, it was more oriented towards an adult group. Adults were the ones back then who were going out and having fun and amusements. And it wasn't until after World War II and the baby boom that Alan Herschell Company decided to really capitalize on the growth of amusement parks. And they started orienting the rides more towards the little kids. And it was wildly successful for the company. Our earliest ride here is the kiddie car ride. And we could bring that up. Excellent. The ride, it has a platform of wooden planks supported by steel tubing, and the cars are a very heavy cast aluminum. It makes for a very stable and secure and safe ride for the kids, and it's very durable. Next slide. The car uses an early drive system, in this case, based on ring and pinion configuration, and that dates back to the first carousels of the 1880s. Heavy cast ring gear, a heavy cast pinion gear, and in this case, you can see it's a double a ring and pinion driving a ring and pinion. It's strong, it's reliable, but it's scary noisy. The gears clashing can make a lot of noise, and I see a lot of kids' eyes get real wide on that. But it has a 1.5 horsepower motor, electric motor, and the ride started up very jerky. So what we had to do was we had to modify it a little bit and put in a motor control module so that the ride starts very gently. That's a modern upgrade that we added to the ride. Being a museum, we try to maintain the rides as they were originally manufactured, but since we do want to give the kids an opportunity to use them, sometimes we have to make a little bit of an upgrade. Next slide. These lights have been restored to the original. We had some of the original parts, and then we did some modifications, and it features 80 individual incandescent bulbs hanging around the perimeter of the rounding boards. Next. This ride, as well as all the others, are fully portable. These were meant to be used in traveling type shows. They're easily broken down and reassembled by 2 men in 3 to 4 hours. These had to be talented guys, because I've worked on these machines, and assembling them in 2 hours had to be quite the trick. But it was quite common back in the day. The ride requires a space of about 22-foot diameter, and the ride weighs 7,000 pounds, fits into an 18-foot flatbed truck or trailer. I'll go to the next slide. This is our pony cart ride. The horses are cast aluminum. In the early carousels, the horses were all beautifully carved by talented wood carvers and then painted and decorated. But as time went on, materials changed. So by the time we got to the pony carts, these were now cast aluminum and then painted. The original ride had concentric mounted front wheels, which gave the horses kind of a galloping motion as they went around the track. That turned out to be a recipe for early bearing failure. So we switched to regular front type wheels. The platform in this case is sheet metal panels supported by steel tubing. Next. The drive mechanism again is a ring and pinion, but in this case it's a single ring and pinion driven by an electric 1.5 horsepower motor, and it has a fluid coupling, which gives the ride a gentle start without having to do any fancy tricks with the electronic controls. The fluid coupling came along, drive system came along in the late 40s, early 50s, and became commonplace on all the Kiddieland rides eventually. Next one. The lights, in this case, are now on shields that are on the perimeter of the rounding boards around the top of the outside of the ride. This is what we call, with the metal shot peen angel wing configuration. So in this case, we have two incandescents and the angel wing configuration. And then on the inside, you can see there's a spotlight, and those spotlights are on the perimeter of the inside of the ride. They light up the horses as they go around. Next slide. This ride, again, can be set up by two men in 3 to 4 hours. So you get to your field or your field day, wherever, and you start unloading them. This one requires a space of about 23 feet in diameter, and it weighs approximately 6,000 pounds, fits into the space of an 18-foot flatbed truck or trailer. Next one. Our wet boat ride. These boats are aluminum. They float in a circular tank. We color the water, so when people drop coins in there, we can't see them. The boats are brightly painted, and each is equipped with bells for riders to ring. Alan Herschel's philosophy was of trying to add as much interactivity to the ride experience as you could, to have the bright colors attracted people, to have the bells, instead of just sitting there and riding, the kids could ring the bells, they could turn the steering wheels. It gave them an opportunity to, be part of the ride a little bit more. Next one. Again, this is a nice shot of the ring and pinion setup. The 1.5 horsepower, again, electric motor that drives the pulley, and that is all driven off of a fluid coupling system for a nice gentle start and a nice gentle stop. Next one. This lighting system, again, you can see the progression where we've gone from the original one, which dates back to the 30s in the cars, up to now we're into the early 50s. And again, you have the shot peened metal angel wings, but now we've gone to fluorescent tubes. These are 2-foot fluorescent tubes, and they have colored sleeves on them, so they can all be more brightly colored, again, to add to the attraction for the kids. Next one. This ride, again, is fully portable. It weighs about 6,000 pounds, and it requires a 24-foot diameter space. It can be assembled by two men in 2 to 3 hours, but it requires 20 feet of flatbed truck and trailer to transport. Next one. Last up is our helicopter ride. It is the only one of these rides that it can accommodate adults. With each one of these cars can lift approximately 300 pounds, so mom and dad can ride with Junior. It's also the most sophisticated ride in our collection, still using a ring and pinion drive. Want to go to the next slide? Still use a ring and pinion slide or drive that gives the circular motion, but now we have a hydraulic system. So we have a center power tower, as we call it, that has the hydraulic motor and the reservoir and the hookups. The hydraulics give us the ability to have the ride, the helicopters, I guess, fly, you might say. There's a hand bar, you pull it back, and the ride, the cabs actually go up, and push on it, the cabs actually come back down again. So it's up to the rider. He can control up and down. Next slide. This is kind of a close-up again of the fluid coupling for the gentle starts. You can see a little bit of the ring gear. Next slide. And there you have another shot of the ring and the pinion. And also on the left, you can see inside that silver little box, there's a disc, or I'm sorry, a shoe type brake system, so that when we stop the ride, the brakes actually slow the ride down instead of letting it freewheel and come to a stop. Next. All right. The helicopters, again, are brightly painted. These are primary colors, bright colors to attract people. And We've researched in our archives to try to restore the helicopters and actually all the rides back to as original as we can. We try to maintain originality in the mechanism as well as in the aesthetics of the ride. All of our rides require regular inspections, safety checks, adjustments, and lubrication to ensure reliable operation. We don't do anywhere near the ridership or the hours of operation that someone like George from the parks would do. We have limited hours that we, and we're kind of secluded, so we don't have mass quantities of people. So our actual hours of operation only end up to be about 80 to 100 hours in a whole season. So although our safety checks and that kind of thing are done daily and regularly before operation of the rides, certain maintenance procedures are spaced out on either a weekly or a monthly basis, depending on how many hours of operation the machines have run. And all of our rides have a triple redundant operator control system so that you can't accidentally start one of these things. And it requires a key lock in order to even power them up in the first place. So we have complete control in that respect. The Kiddieland here at the park has been up for about 6 years now. It's become quite popular. And we're always looking for rides to add to it. So if anybody out there knows of a Alan Herschell ride that isn't being utilized and would like to donate it to the museum, we'd certainly appreciate it. That's pretty much the whole thing there. I know I didn't do my 15 minutes, but I'm open to questions if anybody has any.
John, you did a great job. Thank you so much. Now we're going to begin our Q&A session of tonight's presentation. So John and George, some of these questions are for both of you and some of them are more directed towards one of you. So let's start off with, what kiddie ride did Herschell design first?
I don't know that I could say specifically whether it would be the kiddie car ride or the pony cart ride, because basically they're both the same configuration of a drive mechanism with a series of sweeps that drags something around a platform. I do believe the first ones were actually cars. We have pictures of what looked like Model T type cars. And then as time went on, we changed to more modern cars. You can take the cars off and we have a set of Army tanks. You can put tanks on there and Jeeps. They became more popular around World War II, obviously. And then in the 50s, because of the space age that we were in, we switched and they started having rides that were more spaceship type oriented. So my guess would be that the first ride would be a kiddie car ride.
Actually, you know, my marketing guy did a story on Herschell.
Oh, cool.
I guess I'm seeing that in 1899 or something along those lines. I guess the Carousel was one of their big primary manufacturing things. That was their big push.
That's what started the business. 1880 something or other there, Alan Herschell started manufacturing carousels with James Armitage, and but they were adult oriented. Those things, the RPMs on them, they really whipped. You had to hang on.
Yeah, our E-Joy Morris was a lot like that. I remember it would go twice as fast as our Chance, and when you had to walk the opposite direction because they were flying back in the day. Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. George, when the Monster Mouse coaster arrived at Quassy, was it new or relocated from another park?
When we got it,
Yeah.
it was used, and I believe we got it from New York, and I want to say might have been Rye Playland.
Okay.
Yeah. And apparently, you know, we refurbished the thing. It was amazing. Actually, we didn't want to sell it. And in order for us to put in the Wooden Warrior, which is a great wooden coaster, we had the town, in its infinite wisdom, thought that there'd be too much noise. Now there, a few people go to a zoning hearing and get on a pedestal. So we said, listen, we'll sell this one if you let us put that one in. So we're not changing the footprint, blah, blah, blah. And but we had that thing in great condition prior to us selling it. I think it's in Mexico somewhere on vacation, but it's still in operation, from what I understand.
That's great.
And I think there's another one at Joyland or somewhere in Texas.
Okay.
So
For both of you, do you use the historic height requirements?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Do you use the historic height requirements for your rides?
Well, John, you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Well, each one of the rides with their literature and their operation literature manuals and that do have minimum and maximums as far as like height and weight goes. So yes, we do. We're very strict about that. Obviously, you can't have an adult sized person try to get in one of the boats. And then again, you can't have a little bitty infant, a 2 or 3 year old riding in the car ride. What we did was we have a painted stick, and there are colors on the stick, and if you fit between the green line, then you can ride. The helicopters are the only ride that we have, like I mentioned before, I think, that allow adults. So that doesn't necessarily have a height requirement. Mom and dad can get on with the little ones and ride around together. It does have a weight requirement because our hydraulics are only going to lift about 300 pounds. I'm sure you guys at the park, you have minimum height requirements for the kids.
We do. But like you said, very much similar to you, the helicopter ride, it must sit comfortably, kind of thing. And again, we try to monitor the size of the people that get in, but that's a difficult task, to have some 17, 18-year-old kids say, you're too big to ride. Cause a little bit of problems, some others.
It can be.
For George, does the Little Dipper run with an original Alan Herschell train?
Yes, it does. And it's loud. Yeah, it's all original. And it's interesting that the caps on the stanchions of the uprights, there was a gentleman by the name of Lou Spina who was kind of a concessionaire here. And the caps actually, Alan Herschell, when they produced the ride, put his name on the caps of each pipe upward cylinder, which was kind of bizarre, so, and I just noticed them, a few years ago that they actually had the guy's name, who was the original purchaser of the ride, alleged purchaser of the ride, even though my family's the one that bought him. The little things that they did back in those days that they just don't do today.
Yeah.
All right. Do the rides in the so George, this one's for you, or sorry, John, this one's for you.
Oh.
John,
Yes.
do the rides in the museum's Kiddieland exhibit sport original Herschell colors?
Well, being a museum, that is part of our reason for being, is trying to represent the machines as they were originally produced. A lot of machines could be special ordered, and that goes way back to the days of the carousels in the 1880s up and through out until the modern times. If you had a special wish for special colored horses or whatever, that could be done. But for the most part, Alan Herschell emphasized bright primary colors. The idea was to have something that was aesthetically attractive and was a happy spirit. You're in an amusement park. So we have literature up in the archives, sales literature, original mechanical drawings. And in a lot of that, it'll give us our choice of colors, and we try to stay within that palette.
And George, what does Quassy do about the paint colors?
We're not as traditional as a museum. So it's basically what's on sale.
That works.
But no, all joking aside, it's interesting. John and I were talking a little bit before offline, and I was looking, especially when you got to your slideshow, John. First of all, your pieces are in amazing shape, and the color schemes were very similar to what we have, especially that center hub. It's funny when you had the better photos of it in real time, in real life, I thought that was our center hub. Cars, no, we've gotten a little bit more metallic, a little bit more modern, but that could change next year. I mean, but we like the Alan Herschell, the Little Dipper. At one point, we tried to get that back to the traditional colors, and do a little bit of research on it. It's not as important to us as it may be for John. But you know what? At the end of the day, nostalgia is what it's all about. I mean, it's all our childhood. Especially for a guy like me, I drove those antique cars. I mean, we were, like I said, around the world in my eyes as a young kid. The helicopters, I flew everywhere with those things. So, yeah, I think, especially as we get older, the nostalgia comes back and it's more important.
Definitely. All right, John, do you know where the rides at the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum came from?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the kiddie car ride was donated by a private donation. It was in very sad shape. We kind of don't think that it's all one original ride, but it's a remnants of an original ride that we're having parts brought back and reassembled. If you look at the drive system, if you look at the lighting system, it kind of screams pre-war, but the cars obviously are post-war. The rounding boards are post-war. So that ride was a private donation given to us that we restored and refurbished and made operable again. The other three rides, the boat ride, the pony cart ride, and the helicopter ride, came from a local hot dog establishment. It was a place called the Whistle Pig. And a lot of families would go up there. They'd have a hot dog that was covered in cheese and wrapped in bacon. It was so good. And then you'd ride the rides. And even when I was a kid, and I'll give myself away, back in the 50s, my parents would take me there, and I would ride the helicopter, I would ride the boats and the pony carts, have myself a hot dog, and a great memory. My kids were taken to the Whistle Pig and rode those rides. After the Whistle Pig changed ownership, the person who bought it decided they didn't want to be bothered with that stuff anymore. So the rides ended up here at the museum. They weren't the challenge to restore and rebuild that the car ride was, but still in all, we went through them completely, got them restored and rebuilt. And now actually my grandson and my granddaughter have had an opportunity to ride those very same rides. So 3 generations of my family have ridden those rides, and we're very happy to have them here.
We definitely are happy to have them here. Now, both of you have personal connections to Herschell Kiddieland rides since you rode them when you were little. Do you remember what your favorite ride was when you were younger?
You want me to start off with this one, John?
Sure.
All right. So here's the deal. Obviously, as you get older, you grow, right? Well, like I said to you earlier, the kiddie car ride was, I lived in that thing. I think, my mother had to yank me out at the end of the night. As I got older, as being a park brat, the Kiddieland employees were the cool guys. So I used to hang out at the Little Dipper. And I'll never forget the first time the employee slammed the lap bar down and set me off, and I was petrified. But after I made the first go round, it was nonstop from there. So, not only was I hanging out the pool, but I rode it endlessly. So, depending on my age bracket as I grew, I went from the kiddie ride to the Little Dipper, and then, hanging out the helicopters going up and down is kind of a novelty. But I would say those two were the key ones for me. Not so much the boats and not so much the jet fighters, as much as the kiddie boat, the kiddie cars, and then the Little Dipper.
I had a similar trajectory, I guess, in that when I was younger, I used to really like riding on the helicopter. That was my favorite one. Being able to go up and down just by pulling that bar was just so cool. And to be up in the helicopter and looking down and waving to my parents or whatever, that was just a great time. And then as I got a little older, Crystal Beach in Canada was a very big amusement park back in the day. And they had a wild mouse. And that wild mouse just scared the bejesus out of you. I mean, you thought for sure you were going to fly off the end of that thing at times. So that became my favorite Alan Herschell ride.
Yeah, I forgot about the wild mouse. Yeah, that's but obviously the progression from the Little Dipper to the wild mouse would have been. We spent a lot of days there. That's how I met my wife.
Oh, there you go.
I took her on she was visiting a friend, and I said, "I'll take you on the wild mouse." She never left.
There you go.
All right, I think this is going to be our last question for today. Are any of these rides still produced today?
Are they still what?
Still produced.
John, that's probably a better question.
Yeah, they in the early 1960s, Alan Herschell was bought out by Chance Manufacturing, and the whole business moved out to the Midwest. The manufacturing of Kiddieland type rides kind of went by the wayside, and they concentrated more and more on building just carousels. In the 1980s, the Alan Herschell portion of Chance Manufacturing was up for auction. It was purchased and brought back to North Tonawanda, but only as a parts supplier to support Kiddieland rides that still exist and are in operation. They're not being, Alan Herschell doesn't manufacture rides anymore. That's a thing of the past, part of a legendary past of the company, but it does still exist 140 years later. And they're selling parts to help maintain, which I believe somewhere over 150 Kiddieland rides out there across the country still in use.
Oh, wow. All right. So that was our last question for today. Thank you so much, George and John, for your wonderful presentations and a really good Q&A session. Thank you to everyone that joined us. And when you exit today's Zoom, a survey link about today's session will pop up. I will also be emailing the link to everyone. And if you have any questions or would like to participate in a future Carousel Chat, please email me at education@carousel.museum.org. Thank you again for joining us and have a great night.
Thank you. It was enjoyable.
Thanks.
John, pleasure meeting you.
Same here. Hope to meet you in person someday.
Me too. Enjoyed it. All right, guys, everybody have a great day.